panel to come in front before we rush through our program this morning. Firstly, I will call Hoshi L.M. Mukwena to come in front and join us as he's one of the people who participate in this discussion. And also, I'm going to call Dr. Yanga Majola to come forward, ladies and gentlemen, and also Ms. Bonolo Mahale to come forward. And I'm also going to call Mr. Kanya Vilagazi. Place with understanding and knowledge, why exactly have we gathered in this place this morning? Without waste of any time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to F. Nichiyombo, Campus Rector of TT Mbombela, to come forward. Can we clap hands as it comes forward? Can we clap hands for him as it comes forward? Ladies and gentlemen, can we clap hands for the doctor? Can we clap hands for the doctor? Can we clap hands for the doctor? Thank you so much.
Program Director, please do not get ill. I don't have my syringes and my medication for today. I only brought my mouth and ears and maybe my small mind. I want to be very careful here. I want to avoid creating situations in which some people would feel happier than others. I want everybody to feel happy. The reason I'm saying this is that I know that there are dignitaries here, and if I mention one and leave out the other, the chances are that someone will say, I mentioned more, only acknowledge that one and excluded me, and that will not be present. At the same time, I cannot avoid acknowledging a face or two that need to be given special recognition. I acknowledge the presence of the Commissioner from IEC, Wamashimini. I want to respectfully ask you to stand up so that people who might only have seen on TV can see you in flesh, face to face, as they say. Those of you who watch TV would know that this is a familiar face, particularly when we are nearing the elections and middle of the elections. You will be all over the TV screens and it's doing its job. Similarly, I want to acknowledge Chief Mukwena. What is it? Oh, sorry. In my own vendor custom, I should have greeted the visitor in a particular way. But I know that he understands that he has been given this particular honor to be here with us. There are others. I can see pastors amongst us. I don't have their names. I can see the provincial structure of IEC. I see headmen and headwomen. I see senior government officials. I see colleagues. I see friends. I see the CMC Campus Management Committee members here. This is a very special day to all of us. Those of you who were around Mbombela and Westbury yesterday would know that it was extremely hot. And I said to myself, how am I going to make my visitors, special visitors, cool? The hall is not properly air conditioned. So I immediately consulted the weather woman. I avoided the weatherman because the weatherman whole day. I said to the weather woman, please give me a pleasant weather tomorrow. And she said, we have got it. And indeed, she fulfilled her promise. Today's a beautiful day, beautiful weather. I welcome you to Mpumalanga TUT campus. This is not a small event, and I do not care about numbers. Numbers, to me, are at times very deceiving. But I'm looking at the brains, the brain power that I have in front of me. That's what matters to me. Even if I were talking to 2 or 3 people, as long as I'll be convinced that I'm talking to people who are listening, and I'm talking to people who matter, then I'll feel good. The theme of this workshop or conference, I don't know what to call it, comes at a very critical moment when our country is preparing for the next general elections in the next few months. And those of you who recall, when we had the first experience of elections in 1994, very few of us could fall asleep soundly because of the excitement that we were all experiencing. It was a journey from nowhere to somewhere. It was a journey that says to us that we're witnessing transformation, we're witnessing emancipation, we're witnessing freedom. It is there. We're almost there. We're marching towards that freedom. And I know that everyone was excited. Even those that might have had doubts about this, eventually they were converted. They believe that this is going to be part of our democracy. Now today, we want to profile the traditional leadership institution. I know that our constitution, to a very large extent, maybe I'm wrong, forgive me if I am, and allow me to make a mistake. I'm a human being after all. There is something next to me which is making noise. I don't know whether I touched it or it touched me.
Yeah, you did touch it.
Okay, sorry about that. I was saying that our constitution, to a very large extent, do not give the institution of traditional leadership the prominence it deserves. We as Africans lived in harmony under traditional leadership. Laws and rules and regulations were observed. Life was good. When people angered each other, when people fought, when a thief steals a goat or a chicken or a donkey, there were always traditional methods of making sure that that issue is attended to, and attended to the satisfaction of everybody. Now, I'm saying this just to remind us, particularly people from the African descent, that let's never make a mistake of actually forgetting the traditional leadership institution. That is where we come from. In fact, someone told me at some point, I don't know whether this person was right or not, and this person says, if you were to resort back to the traditional leadership ways of managing conflict, for instance, we'll be much better off. But because our constitution is mostly I would say, enslaving mentality, that you only talk of leadership when you restrict these people to a particular setup. But put them on the international arena, then they've got no role to play, which is false. Now, today, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting a journey which is well defined, a journey which was well planned, that again we do want to revive the important role of the traditional leadership in our communities, particularly when we are about to start with the preparations for the elections. Recently, I was appointed by the Minister of Health to be a member of the council, which is called Interim Traditional Health Practitioners Council of South Africa. Traditional health practitioners. Whilst I was engaging with colleagues in that council, I realized that there's a lot that we as African people ignored and disregarded, which I think, and if we analyze deeply, that will solve a lot of our problems. Someone said to me jokingly, I said, if you ask a traditional dealer to tell this group here that don't walk out of that door or else, no one will do that. Is that not correct? If a traditional healer says, Nechombo, never go walk through that door, I'll say, of course, I'll comply. I'm not going there. So I'm just using, a ridiculous example to demonstrate the influence that our traditional structures have in our lives. And if we again wake up, I'm sorry to use the word wake up, maybe it is right. If we again wake up and begin to celebrate these institutions, and how do we and determine how are we going to use these institutions to deepen our democracy? How are we going to now be cautious about how we treat and understand the role of traditional leadership? When he walked in, I could see that this is not an ordinary person, believe me, without asking. And when I was told that is Koshi Mukwena, I said, yeah. He carries that, I don't know what to call it, that stature, which defines him. This institution. Let's use this institution to deepen democracy. Let's use this institution to make sure that elections are done peacefully, elections are done professionally, elections are done in a manner that everybody else is going to feel free to participate. So I'm saying to you this morning, ladies and gentlemen, that when the IEC made the request to use this facility for this meeting, we said to ourselves, this is the right thing, this is the right decision. We are here to accommodate you. We are here to make sure that you become part of our institution, which is now TUT. TUT is singularly proud that you came here. I have seen members of staff members from our sister university, UMP. I'm not saying you should feel jealousy. I'm just saying today you are at TUT. Maybe next time we'll be at UMP. We'll come. We are just saying, let's together carry this responsibility of making sure that the IEC uses us and uses us productively and progressively. We cannot withdraw, we cannot reverse when we are called upon to execute such a novel, such a majestic thing to do. TUT is saying to all of you, Bomashinene, Bomukwena and others, pastors and everybody, senior government officials, you are welcome at TUT. And you may now deem this conference or meeting formally opened. You are welcome.
Thank you so much to the doctor. He touched on very important points. The issue of the prominence of traditional leaders in our society, the issue of the respect of this institution. But I'm glad that today we are going to discuss all that, ladies and gentlemen, as the IEC has planned this event. I want to make an announcement for everyone who have just joined us. The seats in front, they are reserved for officials, according to the reports that I got from the IEC. If you've just joined us, welcome to the Traditional Leader Seminar that has been organized by the IEC. And also, ladies and gentlemen, those who want to use the toilets at the back, when you just go out in that door, you'll just find the toilets, male and female. Make sure that when nature calls, you just rush in. I would just like to welcome everyone who have just joined us. As I've mentioned before that we have our panelists, let me just remind you we have Mr. Mokoena in our midst, and also we have Dr. Yanga Majola, and also Ms. Bonolo Mahale, and also Mr. Kanya Vilagaze. Ladies and gentlemen, without waste of any time, we're going to
call upon Mr. Glenn Mashinini, who is the IEC Commissioner. Let us just clap hands for him as he comes in front to set the scene, ladies and gentlemen, and understand exactly why are we here. Let's give him the hand of applause as the Commissioner is coming forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Kunexhunge lana angazi nami ngizofike ngone noma ngenze njani kodwa ngizozama i-setup yala iyadida kancane angazi noma ningayiqhelisa na le iPad ngingaze ngimoshe kakhulu nakethu ngiyabonga kakhulu akufanele ukuthi uvakashile sofika usuyaphoxa nje let me take this opportunity to express my singular honor and privilege to be invited once again in this auspicious occasion by the leadership of this province. Ngibingelele ondaba ezitha ngokuphelela kwabo ngiqale ngibingelele undaba ezitha uHoshi Mokoena who is very much a respected and well-recognized leader in our country. And I'm underlining leader because it's beyond his traditional authority that one wishes to acknowledge and recognize him. Further, take the opportunity to express our gratitude kuSokhaya uDr. Nechiyombo okuyena osivulelele ikhaya leli to come together. And then let me also thank Mvombi Emelangeni program director wethu namhlanje ukuthi ke asinike le nkundla njoba ke bese kwethuliwe ukuthi isibonge uNtozimandla lo phambi kwenu uGuliwe uLibembe wakamashinini ngithunywe nami ukuthi nje ngisondele la kuyaye ukuthi uma kuzosinwa kube khona laba bokuthiwa ke abafana bahambe bobhula amazolo ngizobhula amazolo ke mina ukuthi ke inkundla ke kuyothi sekufika ke ingqonqolo esezethuliwe kithi ongqondo abazosethulela inkulumo ehambisana nesihloko esikhulu esihlangene ngaso namhlanje njoba nibabona ngohla lwabo ukuthi bazosicaphunela mayelana nalesihloko lesi esiphakanyiswa i-IEC ekutheni amakhosi endabuko thina njengo-IEC we thought it was also important in our continuous programs and engagements on thought leadership to actually lift this particular topic. Engathi mangithi ngiyayisho kuzonqamuka ulimi sizoyishiyela zona ingqonqolo leziyana okuyibona abazochaza kahle ukuthi kukhulunywa ngani ke manje mase kuthiwa lento ebhaliwe. Ngiqhubeke ke on behalf of the IEC njoba bese ngishilo ukuthi ke the House of Traditional Leaders and Khoisan Leaders Executive Committee and nawo wonke amakhosi endabuko aphelele lana siyanamukela siyakhuleka futhi sithi ondaba ezitha singayini thina ngaphandle kwenu baphathi bomhlaba singayini thina sizwe ngaphandle kwenu ngamasiko namagugu okuyiwona esingasho ukuthi umcebo osezandleni zenu nokuthi nathi sizazi noma siqhenye futhi ukuthi singobani siqhamukaphi siyapi ingoba nina as the custodians of our culture heritage nikhona uthi omunye wama leaders uAmika Cabral to quote uthi a tree without its roots is dead. Similarly, a people without their culture, heritage, and history, singasho nje ukuthi cha, sekuwumquba nje loyo. Ingakho ke sithe thina ke as the IEC kusemqoka ukuthi isihloko in our programs of thought leadership sike silifte i-issue yani yobukhosi namakhosi kule qhaza leli sibhekane nalo lenkululeko le democracy. Ngiqhubeke ngibonge ngibingelele futhi izivakashi zethu ezikhona la kulendlu kodwa bakhona futhi aba online siyabingelela nabo ke emakhaya noma kulezo indawo ngeendawo abakuzo njengoba bese ngishilo ukuthi ke simenywe inkosazana lana udadewethu uGugu Langa kuyena umphathi wale province angazi noma bayamazi ke abanye benu singamcela nje ukuthi nje aphakamise isandla abingelele udadewethu ulapha noza kwabo ume Manteta Nkaro provincial electoral officer wase Limpopo ngicela naye asukume umkhaya wami ke lona kodwa ke ngixoxela ngelinye ilanga ukuthi ngithi yini umkhaya kodwa nje into esemqoka engithokozisayo ukuthi IEC over the years has become more and more progressive. These are the two provincial electoral officers that are women that are present here. But we are proud as the Electoral Commission to say we also have the leadership of the province of the Eastern Cape and the province of KwaZulu-Natal, all those provinces, and the province of Northwest. So out of 9 provinces, 5 provincial electoral officers are women. Says noma it's belated, singasho ukuthi nje malibongwe. And ngiqhubeke ngibonge presence of all the heads of the higher learning institutions who are present here with us. We also welcome all the members of the executive committees that are with us. We also have been made aware that we have also mayors and speakers from the various municipalities in the province. And Sino Zagwetu futhi singesibakhohlwe who always grace our activities. These are the heads of Chapter 9 institutions that are present here. And we are very much pleased also to have been joined by the head of Salga la Mpumalanga, Dr. Ndlovu. And there's also the honor to have His Grace from the South African Council of Churches, both Reverend Tau, together with Bishop Twala and Nabanye bandla ahlukahlukene inkolo esinabo lana. Sibonge kakhulu intatheli ngoba phela intatheli yizona ezikwaziyo ukuthi zithathe imessage esinayo zifake emphakathini. Siyabonga kakhulu the continuous cooperation of the media that always cooperated with the commission over the years. We also welcome our holy or the elected representatives and the political party liaison committee. Those members constitute the most important what you call stakeholders in the work that is the mandate of the commission, because indeed without the contestants, there would be a purpose of having inkundla and yokhetho. So it is important that we acknowledge the leadership present here with us. Sibuye sibonge futhi the municipal electoral officers. Those are the people that the responsibility of the commission is entrusted with. And so they play a very critical and important role in the chain and the cog of the Electoral Commission, from the national to the province, and from the province to the municipalities, and then ultimately to the regions and the VDs. We also want to acknowledge the presence of the provincial and regional conflict coordinators, who play an important role in making sure ukuthi ke singasho nje ukuthi izicimamlilo zethu njengo IEC. So we want to acknowledge them. We also, as the Electoral Commission, rely very strongly on people with expertise in research and policy development, and all the researchers that have joined us today. We welcome them. And also we want to acknowledge that we have a very competent and committed provincial team of employees who are our staff members as the IEC, without whom the commission would not be in a position to discharge its constitutional responsibility. And those are very important. We'd like just, if the staff members of the commission who are inside the venue, if we could just stand up and bingelelwe, bingelelwe ke, ningacela nje nisukume. Kukhona osukumisa abanye kodwa yena akasukumi. And we also acknowledge the presence of Advocate Tabango Settler, Nkosi uMahlangu. Ngingabike ukuthi ke ngathi ngiyabandlulula ngoba sengishilo ukuthi ke onke amakhosi ondaba ezitha siyakhuleka kini nonke ngokufanayo nangokulingana futhi. Sekuthi nje njoba bangibhalela ama note sengifunda noma yini ebhaliwe, angazi noma sengifunde ku right noku wrong kokunye lo ngufundile. Ladies and gentlemen, nani bondaba ezitha, njoba sengishilo ukuthi mina ngizobhula nje amazolo la enkundleni. Into esemqoka njoba sengishilo ukuthi I acknowledge all the elected representatives that is of the people. It is important also to acknowledge that the provincial what you call legislator or provincial representatives have also honored and graced this particular function. We would like to acknowledge all the leadership, not only at the municipal level, that is with us. Kukhona inkondlo esasifunda siseyingane. Angazi noma ukhona ongayikhumbula lapha ethi uThekwane. Ukhona oyikhumbulayo? Ethi nangu Thekwane. ngizoyizama ke ukuthi nanguThekwane ezibuka emanzini ethi ngemuhle kanti ngemubi ngoniwa yileli qhubu elangemila esiphundu. This is what symbolically is what today is all about. We know that the Electoral Commission was established by the Constitution of South Africa together with other Chapter 9 institutions of the country. And if we can remind ourselves, its role entailed critically the following three. To manage elections of national and provincial and legislative bodies in accordance with national legislation, and to ensure that those elections are free, fair, and credible. And thirdly, to declare the results of those elections within a good period of time. So, as I have just shared with you the poem earlier on, Egategwan, is that we are in a period now that we can say three things that are happening in our country. Among those things is the first milestone is that our democracy has turned 30, or will be turning 30. And it's 30 means 3 decades. Since 1994, when our founding father, Nelson Mandela, cast his first vote, Ohlange. The second coming event is that next year, once again, our country, young as it is as a democracy in the continent, we are proud that we've been able as a country, under the guidance of the Electoral Commission, to conduct national, provincial elections, as well as municipal elections. So next year, once again, we are going to the polls. And as we all know, again, the third thing that will be happening is that 2024 will be the first time where independent candidates will be able to participate as the contestants. So it becomes a very interesting season as we build up to the elections. And so in that particular period, we have said, asikebe sibe yini uThekwane nathi siyibuke emanzini under the auspices of the traditional institutions and the traditional leaders. To be in a position then to say the journey that has been traveled. What does that journey mean? What does it mean for the traditional institutions? What does it mean for the traditional leaders? And nathi njengoThekwane singayibona sibahle ngale democracy yethu. Kodwa ke asazi ke njoba sishilo ukuthi our intellectuals are here. Ngiyabazi ke omphephethe lapha nokuthi bagadla ngazo zonke. So ke we are not going to pussyfoot around the issues. It's important that we as the country, we continue to debate and engage on the issues openly, and at the same time also to reflect and look where we've come from and where we are going. In that way, we will be then celebrating what I had said earlier on, the institution of traditional and Khoisan leadership that we as a country have been able to at least make sure that those structures, those institutions are in place. And many of us are products of initiatives and efforts of the traditional leaders and traditional institutions. The services that they have done and they've performed for the nation over the years, from fighting the wars and fighting for the democracy, to making sure in the areas there's education, there's schools, there's services, to where we are today. And we should also celebrate the fact that in our country, the institution is protected by the Constitution, as well as the various legislations. And so it's a very a significant matter and issue that at this juncture we reflect, especially because the political and the administrative landscape of our country find that we also have embraced modernity. So the modern democratic institutions, especially through elected representatives, also form a very important pillar of our constitutional democracy and our constitution as a country. And this is a democracy that we all know that was fought for over many years, from traditional leaders resisting and fighting until when they forged the political formation that pioneered a political struggle in this country in 1912 to where we are as a country. So when we look at this modernity and the tradition, we cannot help but acknowledge that it is a paradox. And those who were part of the constitutional development in 1994 will acknowledge that there remains unfinished business between the traditional institutions and traditional leaders. And as I had served previously in my first term in the commission, I never missed the opening of the House of Traditional Leaders. I always attended those. And prior to that, when I was an advisor in the presidency, I also attended those particular engagement and forums. One is conversant with a number of issues, some that have been resolved, others that have been parked under on the side, and others that have emerged and they continue to manifest themselves. Now, as a nation, what is important is we must confront the issues. We must dialogue about the issues, and we must find solutions, because that's what life is about. It's a continuum. So among the issues of the modernity and traditional is how do we deal with some of those issues. I don't want to take the carpet under the feet from our key speakers. Excuse me. As I say, from my side is that the paradox that exists, it actually calls all of us, especially those who are leaders of our nation, to reflect on the various issues and the challenges that relate to the evolution of our democracy, with its own different views and the manifestations of the different pros and cons as successes and challenges of the coexistence of the modernity and alongside our traditional leadership. And I think we in South Africa can be in a position to say we also provide an interesting example of how modern African democratic institution and system is trying and has tried to grapple with the issues of traditional institutions and the traditional leaders. But at the same time, we've also had a number of areas where there's room for us to make the improvement. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I had said, for me, I don't want to get into the actual issues. I've left them for our invited discussants that will be here. I've been asked that then I should urge each and every one of you, both here and online, singing the commercial, which I'm not being paid for, Koko. It clearly is a commercial. We urge each and every one of you to encourage our families, our friends, members of our communities to use the online voter registration portal to register for the 2024 elections. Those that are already registered can log on and check their details. And over and above, all the stations in the country will be opened for registration from the 18th to the 19th of November 2023, from 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. Alternatively, those who prefer to register in person before the registration weekend can also visit our local offices across the country. I hope the commission for this commercial will follow, because I didn't know I'm doing the commercial as well. Ngibonga kakhulu the leadership of this province. Ngibonge nina bondaba ezitha ukuthi ningineze nje indlebe. Ngibonge the provincial leadership and executive that is present, and the elected representatives of the municipalities. Ngibonge program director to give me the indulgence that I've taken in just giving this overview. And I'd like to thank all of you for having given me this opportunity once again. Thank you very much. Mlange.
Thank you so much to Mr. Mashilini, who has mentioned that we are living interesting times in South Africa, as we will see independent candidates run next year. The doctor mentioned that this is the time where we are taking a journey as a country in honoring the institution of traditional leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have just joined us, we have our audience online. Make sure that you tell a friend, you tell a brother that they can participate in this very important event, because this is very important. The country is heading to elections next year. And also, ladies and gentlemen, if nature calls, you can use that exit door. The toilets are on the other side of the buildings. We are gathered today in this thought leadership seminar that is planned by the IEC in Mpumalanga. I will urge every one of us that this conversation is very important, that everyone participate. If you have a view and opinion, the time will come where everyone will be given an opportunity to say whatever that is in your heart, because I believe that every one of us wants to see progress in our culture, in our society. We want to talk about the institution of traditional leaders. How can there be a relationship between those who are in government and also traditional leaders in our society? I'm not sure whether Dr. Thabo Rapu is in our midst. If he's here, ladies and gentlemen, we'll clap hands as he comes forward to introduce our panel this morning. Doctor, are you here? He's here. Let's give him the hand of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning. Thanks. Thanks to the program director. Let me start by also, I'll align myself with the protocol as outlined by Commissioner Mashinini. Commissioner Mashinini, welcome. I'm glad you joined us today. It's always a pleasure to have one of our commissioners to set the scene for us in this program. This is, as Commissioner said, this is a thought leadership program that we designed. I think it was introduced about 2 years ago. The purpose behind it, just briefly on the program, the purpose behind it is to allow us to bring together thought leaders. What we mean by thought leaders is people who can lead us in thinking around critical issues and subjects of concern to the IEC. From my face. There's a number of subjects that the IEC is interested in. That helps us to think around our mandate, to help us improve our mandate, the way we do our work. And some of these issues, we need to learn about it. We are a learning organization. We have a number of areas that are related to electoral democracy. These are the areas that will help us understand more about our mandate and better ways of discharging our mandate, and this is one of the critical areas. So we've gathered leaders, people who are thinkers, people who have dedicated time, experience, and knowledge and efforts to generate ideas that we can learn from. So we want to learn from these leaders. This is what we call our thought leaders, people who can lead us in thinking. And we are glad today. My task is to introduce those people, but before we do that, as Commissioner Mashinini said, we have a number of leaders here. I'd like to especially acknowledge the presence of Kgoshi Mokoena. We are honored to have you here with us. We have, as the Commissioner said, a number of leaders, community leaders, people from leaders from our religious sector, political leaders, community leaders amongst us. We are honored and glad to have you here with us. And we have, let me also thank the Provincial Electoral Officer of our province here, Megugulanga. We are happy and glad that you led this initiative, that we are gathered here today. Menka Romatet, I'm glad to have you here with us today. It's always a pleasure to have you here in our. You attend a lot of our thought leadership events across the provinces, and I'm glad to see you here again today. As I said, this is a national program. It happens in all the provinces, not just here. We run across all the 9 provinces where we gather people people with considerable expertise in their areas of concern, areas of leadership, to help us as the IEC to understand more about the nature of the work that we do and other areas that are related to it. It helps us grow as an organization. We have a unit at the IEC called the Knowledge Center. So we gather this knowledge and harness it and we store it so that in the future we can refer back to it and learn out of it. So what we are going to get today is not going to end here. It's going to be used for the future. It's going to be used as reference. We are going to, okay. All right, thanks. We gather this information not just for the sake of it. We gather it to learn out of it, and it helps us plan, it helps us be able to formulate some of the activities, some of the programs that we do for the future. So we learn out of it and we use it for the future to help the IEC strengthen its capacity, its knowledge, and its ability to discharge its mandate. So now let me go to the task that I was asked to discharge today, to introduce to you our panel, the speaker as well as the panel of the panelists who are going to respond to the main presentation. The presenter today, our main speaker, is Dr. Yanga Majola. I have a brief background note here that I'm going to read to you. Dr. Majola is an academic manager of the Faculty of Humanities, TUT, or Tshwane University of Technology, Mbombela campus, and is a linguistics lecturer in the Department of Applied Linguistics. He holds a diploma, Bachelor of Technology. Dr. Majola, you'll correct me if I'm, it's written, I think it's in Latin, and I'm trying to simplify it. Bachelor of Technology is a Master of Technology in Language Practice from TUT, completed PhD in African Languages and Linguistics at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. He's currently enrolled for the postgraduate diploma in higher education at Rhodes University in Makanda. He's a trustee of the Tshwane University of Technology Pension Fund Board and a member of the TUT Institutional Forum, and a Secretary General and EXCO member of the NAMES Society of Southern Africa. He's also worked as a translation studies lecturer at the Central University of Technology. Dr. Majola is teaching and researching, his teaching and researching interest and focus are on computational linguistics, linguistic digital humanities, that's a mouthful, the fourth industrial revolution, Isibaka, dialectology and onomastics. Is that correct? Thank you. He has published articles in Department of Higher Education and Training accredited journals. He's currently supervising postgraduate students and has presented papers at local and international conferences. As a student, he held various leadership roles at TUT, including 2 terms as an Institutional Students Representatives Council, Treasurer General, as the Institutional Students Representatives Council Treasurer General and Postgraduate Forum Treasurer. Dr. Majola, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation and you to lead us in this subject. The next, Dr. Majola would be the main presenter. The panelists would include Mr. Khanya Vilakazi. He is a lecturer of political science and international relations at University of Mpumalanga. He currently holds a master's degree in political science and is in pursuit of his PhD. He has held various positions within the Human Sciences Research Council from 2016 to 2020. The work he has involved in as a researcher has traversed various disciplines with the human and socio-political space, within the human and socio-political space. He has been able to work across multiple provinces of South Africa in collaboration with international and national institutions, conducting community-based research. Before joining the council, he was with the University of KwaZulu-Natal within the politics department. He has enjoyed being a political analyst that has worked continuously with various media outlets nationally. His main academic interest centers around elections and political landscape with a realist perspective of events as and when they occur. Mr. Vilakazi, we are pleased to welcome you as one of our discussants and respondents in a panel. Ms. Bonolo Makale is also one of our panelists. She's a program manager of the Democracy and Civic Engagement Unit at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, and the convener of the Pan-African Parliament Civic Society Forum. She holds a Bachelor of Public Theology from Cornerstone Institute, a BA Honours in Development Studies from Wits University, and she has a Master's degree in Public Policy, also from Wits School of Governance, and is currently completing an MPhil in Jurisprudence from University of Pretoria. Her academic interests are in politics, electoral reforms, public policy, and democratization in Africa. The body of work through her work through research and advocacy aims to close the democratic gap between African Union organs and African civil society by creating formal mechanisms of engagement for African civil society and the youth to critically and strategically engage with the African Union human rights and governance institutions. She has contributed a chapter in a published book by Mapungube Institute for Strategic Reflection, Marriages of Inconvenience, The Politics of Coalitions in South Africa. She authored chapter 11, which assesses the nature of coalition government in the city of Johannesburg following the 2016 local government elections, with a focus on the stability of the coalition and its impact on governance. She also contributed a chapter in the book, Political Parties, Identity, Populism, and Democracy Consolidation in South Africa, Emerging Opportunities, Challenges and Implications for Nation Building. The chapter analyzed the trends of political parties' influence on the development of South Africa's political identity and the changes that have occurred in the past 3 decades. I'm also told that Kgoshi Mokoena is also one of our panelists or members of the panel. I don't have to, I'm sure Kgoshi Mokoena is well known amongst all of us in the province, and we welcome Kgoshi Mokoena to participate in our panel, and we look forward to discussions. And as I said, we regard our panel members as thought leaders, and they will be leading us in thinking around this subject. And I'm hoping that they are not just leading us, but we will also engage them in their ideas. Thought leadership does not just mean us accepting without engagement. So I'm looking forward to the engagement that comes out of it, and that exchange will help us as the IEC to learn more about this subject and use that knowledge to improve the quality of the work that we do and the way we execute it going forward. As Commissioner Masinini said, as next year we have elections, and some of these ideas, even though this subject might not be immediately related to next year's elections, we have national and provincial governments, but we do have local government elections coming, and hopefully this will help us reflect on this and the interface between traditional leaders as well as elected public representatives. And that paradox, we need to explore it and see what comes out of that engagement and that exploration. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Let's give the doctor the hands of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much to Dr. Rapu. We've mentioned that this program will also help the IEC in future. And this is not going to end today. If you've just joined us, welcome to the Thought Leadership Seminar, ladies and gentlemen. We also have our audience online. You can just tell your friend, your brother, your sister to send a message or any opinion of you, because this is very important that people say something about this important topic today, because we are tackling the issue of traditional leaders in our society. I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, we've been waiting for this moment because everyone has been saying, I was talking to a friend the other day, I was telling him about the event today, and he said he thinks that traditional leaders in our society have helped our families. Traditional leaders have helped in terms of instilling the values in our culture. And ladies and gentlemen, we've been waiting for Dr. Yanga to come forward to explain exactly why are we here today, what is the reason behind this event, what is the importance of traditional leaders in our society. We're going to call him to come forward. Doctor, you can come forward. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give him the hand of applause as Dr. Yanga is coming forward.
Program Director, Ms. Cindy Siwe, who is the Master of Ceremonies, Commissioner Mashinini, Khoshi Mokoena, Ndabezit, Ms. Gugu Langa, the Provincial Head of the Commission in Mpumalanga, Dr. Thabo Rapo, Mr. Kaya Vilagazi, fellow panelist, and Ms. Bunolo Makhale, fellow panelists once more. Dr. Kenneth Nechombo, the campus rector of the TUT Mbombela campus, the campus management committee of TUT Mbombela, support and academic staff present here today, the organizing committees from both TUT and the IEC in Mpumalanga, the Tshwane University of Technology Mbombela campus SRC president, Ms. Pumzile Kalipago, and the entire student populace. Ladies and gentlemen, manene na manenekazi, all protocol observed. Molweni, Sanbonani, Abusheni, Dimacheloni, Lochani, Dumelang, good morning, Goeiemorgen. Please allow me to first express my sincere gratitude for being allowed to address this thought leadership seminar. It is such a great honor and privilege to stand among great men, both in the physical audience and in the online platforms, from various spheres of government and distinguished persons present here today. Now, in light of the upcoming general elections in South Africa, I have the honor of being here in front of you today to talk about the significant part that traditional leadership plays in the process. The combination of contemporary democracy with traditional forms of leadership is a distinctive feature of South Africa's political environment, and it is significantly impactful in terms of how elections are conducted in the country. Almost all countries in the African continent have traditional authorities, although the practices differ from one to another. The setup is usually that of kings or queens, chiefs, as well as headmen. Now, because of how they are organized, traditional authorities are the most immediate form of governance in many rural parts of our society. Their role ranges from the allocation and management of the land, dispute resolutions, environmental preservation, and the promotion and preservation of language and culture. Now, with such functions, Traditional leaders tend to work with general citizens, particularly in rural areas of our society, rather than the modern state institutions, thus defining the decentralization within the South African context, which often includes recognizing their role in the local sphere of government. The role of traditional leadership is predominantly based at the local sphere of government and not necessarily in the national sphere of government. And only through that it is cascaded to the broader parts of society, including provincial and national elections. It is worth noting that local government elections and general elections, which include national and provincial elections, although different in focus, they are both aimed at the development of people's livelihoods at different levels and with different focus. Now, traditional leadership in South Africa dates back centuries, and it's deeply rooted in the diverse cultural fabric of the nation. It encompasses a wide array of traditional leaders, from chiefs to kings, who hold significant influence within their communities. This influence extends beyond customary matters to the realm of politics, especially during the national and provincial elections as well as local government elections. The history of traditional leadership in South Africa is rich and intricate tapestry that spans centuries. It is deeply intertwined with the diverse cultural heritage of the country and has evolved over time in response to the various historical, social, and political changes. Now, here is a brief history and overview of the traditional leadership in South Africa. First is the pre-colonial era, as well as the actual colonial era by the Europeans. Now, prior to the European colonization, South Africa was home of various indigenous peoples, each with its own distinct social and ethnic structures. Many of these structures had traditional leaders such as chiefs, kings, and tribal councils who played a central role in governance and decision-making. These leaders held authorities based on cultural and customary norms, and their leadership was often hereditary. Now, the arrival of colonizers in 1652 marked a significant turning point in South Africa's history, particularly that of traditional leaders. Colonizers, primarily the Dutch and British, introduced their own system of governance, which often undermined the authority of traditional leaders. Land disposition, forced labor, and conflicts with indigenous communities were common during this period, leading to the erosion of traditional structures. Now, the second era is the apartheid era. The apartheid regime, which lasted from 1948 to the early 1990s, further marginalized the traditional leaders in South Africa. Apartheid policies sought to divide and control indigenous communities, sometimes by co-opting or undermining the traditional leadership in this country. Traditional leaders who resisted apartheid policies often faced persecution. Now, let us talk about the post-apartheid relevance of traditional leaders in South Africa. With the end of apartheid and the transition to democracy in 1994, there was a resurgence of interest and recognition of traditional leadership. South Africa's new democratic constitution acknowledged the role of traditional leaders and their institutions within the framework of democracy. The traditional leadership and government framework of 2003 provided a legal framework for the recognition and support of traditional leadership in the various parts of our society. Traditional leaders have regained a significance in local governance and development. They play a role in land administration, dispute resolution, cultural preservation, community development. Traditional leaders have also been involved in national dialogue on issues such as land reform and reconciliation. The role of traditional leaders in modern South Africa has been a subject of debate and controversy, which is probably why we're gathered here today. Some argue that their authority can sometimes be at odds with the principles of democracy, raising questions about accountability and representation. Others see traditional leaders as a valuable part of South Africa's cultural heritage that should be preserved and integrated into the nation's democratic fabric. In summary, the history of traditional leadership in South Africa is marked by a complex interplay of colonialism, apartheid, and post-apartheid developments. Today, traditional leaders continue to play a role, an important one that is, in various aspects of South African society, and their status and influence remains a topic of ongoing discussion and evolution within the country's democratic framework. One of the most prominent ways in which traditional leadership impacts elections is through their endorsement and support of political candidates. Traditional leaders are revered figures in our communities, and their blessings or endorsement can carry immense weight on those candidates. Political parties often seek support of these leaders, hoping to garner the trust and votes of the communities they lead. This relationship between traditional leaders and politicians is not without controversy, as we all know, as it can raise questions about the undue influence and the integrity of the electoral process. But moreover, traditional leaders also play a role in the voter education and mobilization of citizens in this country. They are instrumental in ensuring that their communities are informed about the electoral process, the importance of voting, and the candidates and policies at stake. Through community meetings and engagements, they contribute to fostering an informed and politically active citizenry. Another significant aspect is their involvement in conflict resolution. Traditional leaders often mediate disputes and conflict within their communities, which can be particularly important during the heated period of election campaigns. Their ability to promote peace, unity, can have an impact on the conduct of elections and the overall stability of the country. However, it is essential to strike a balance between preserving traditional leadership's cultural significance and upholding the principles of modern democracy. There has been ongoing debates about the role of traditional leaders in politics, and it is crucial to ensure that their involvement does not infringe upon the democratic values of equality, transparency, and fairness. Traditional leadership plays a crucial role in the preservation of language and culture in many societies. Here are some of the contributions which they make. Number one, they are cultural custodians. Traditional leaders often serve as custodians of cultural heritage. They have a deep understanding of customs, rituals, and traditions that are integral to their community's culture and language. Number two is the language promotion. Traditional leaders can promote the use of their native language within their communities. They may encourage its use in ceremonies such as these, storytelling, and everyday communication, helping to ensure its continuity. Number 3 is oral tradition. Many cultures rely on oral traditions to pass down the knowledge, history, and language. Traditional leaders often play a central role in oral storytelling and passing on of cultural narratives. Number 4, preservation of traditional practices. Traditional leaders uphold and reinforce cultural practices which are closely tied to language. These practices help keep the language alive and relevant in the communities. Number 5, community identity. Traditional leaders help reinforce a sense of identity within their communities. By preserving language and culture, they strengthen the bonds that tie community members together. Number 6, conflict resolution. In some cases, traditional leaders can mediate conflicts within communities, resolve disputes in culturally sensitive manner, which can help maintain social cohesion and protect language and cultural practices. And lastly, education and mentorship. Traditional leaders often serve as mentors and educators, passing on their knowledge of language and culture to the younger generation. And this mentorship is vital for the transmission of cultural values. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, traditional leadership is intertwined with the preservation of language and culture by maintaining the transmission of cultural knowledge, values. Traditional leaders contribute significantly to the ongoing vitality of their communities, languages, and culture. Now, before I close, South Africa has a rich history of traditional leadership, and many traditional leaders have played significant roles in the country's political landscape. I'm just going to mention a few. I know there's many leaders who are involved or have been involved, both traditional leaders who have involved and are involved in politics in this country. But number 1, we can mention Inkosi Albert Luthuli, who's also known as Chief Albert Luthuli. He was a prominent South African leader, an activist known for his role in the struggle against oppression. And number 2, we have got Inkosi Udalipunga, in other words known as former President Nelson Mandela of the Abatembu. Although best known for his political leadership, Mandela has also strong ties to the Tembu royal family. His royal lineage made him significant in the traditional landscape, in addition to his role as an anti-apartheid icon and the country's first black president. Number 3 is Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who recently left the land of the living. Inkosi Yesizwe Buthelezi, as the leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party, he was a prominent Zulu traditional leader. He served as the Prime Minister of the KwaZulu homeland during the apartheid era and played a role in the apartheid politics. These traditional leaders have played diverse roles in South African politics, from advocating for the rights of their communities to participating in the broader national and regional political processes. Traditional leadership continues to be an important aspect of South African society and governance. Now, the traditional leadership in today's society, as correctly put by Lungisile Ntsebeza in 2020, and I quote, The role of traditional authorities, chiefs of various ranks in Africa in the era of multi-party democracy remains unresolved. This issue was brought to the fore in Africa in the early 1990s, when the multi-party democracy and decentralization were imposed on the regimes in Africa by the Bretton Woods institutions. Politicians who were engaged in election politics saw traditional authorities as important actors. They summarized that winning the support of these authorities would put them in strong position to win the support of the subjects. A question thus arises in the contemporary politics of the role of South African traditional authorities in a multi-party democracy, which is founded on the principle of elected leaders. Historically, the institutions of traditional leadership has been comprised of members who are either hereditary or appointed. This gives rise to the tension between leadership based on the democratic principles of representative government and one comprised of unelected leaders. The dilemma confronts South Africa as well. At the dawn of democracy, the country adopted a constitution that in its Bill of Rights enshrined leadership that would be based on the will of citizens, close quote. Traditional leaders have remained powerful and relevant, pre and post-apartheid and colonization. They thus serve as alternative centers of power in many rural areas. This uncomfortable situation forced many governments to bring them to the governance table. The compatibility of traditional authorities with modern democratic norms remain a subject of debate in South Africa and in the African continent at large. Traditional leaders play a role in development and fostering peace, particularly in rural areas. These considerations demand that they be acknowledged and accommodated within governance structures. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the role of traditional leadership in South Africa's general elections is multifaceted and is a complex one. It brings together the rich tapestry of cultural heritage with the demands of modern democracy. And while their influence can be a source of strength, it can pose challenges that need to be carefully navigated. The key lies in finding a balance that respects tradition while upholding the principles of fair and inclusive electoral processes. South Africa's journey towards democracy is ongoing. The role of traditional leadership continues to evolve in this fascinating and dynamic democracy. I thank you.
Let's give the doctor the hand of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all understand now that traditional leaders are very important in our society as they are the custodian of our culture. The doctor mentioned that they played a very important role in the political landscape in terms of making sure that they intervene when there are political conflicts and also playing a role in instilling values in our society. This is the time we've all been waiting for, ladies and gentlemen. Let us all remember that we have our audience online who are participating. They can send their views and their opinion. This is the time where we'll give our panelists to respond on what Dr. Yanga was saying or mentioning. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start with Mr. Kanya Vilagazi to say his mind on what Dr. Majola was saying.
Good day, everyone. All protocol observed. I think there's too many traditional leaders and people of high government prominence that I might miss one and might get an email later reminding me that I should have said so and so. Well, what Doctor was saying is actually quite relevant in terms of the fact that the post-apartheid activism of traditional leaders and the pre-apartheid...
Mr. Vilakazi, I'm
yes, ma'am.
sorry, can you please come forward? Yes.
Okay, no problem.
Basimshayele intandla said.
I hope you can hear me from here. So, as I was saying, what Dr. Majola touched on is actually quite important. We actually need to look at the role that traditional leaders played before 1994 and how traditional leaders, the role that they play in today's society. I'm skeptical to continue because the commissioner said, "Ngiyagadla." Now, I don't know to who engizobeka imgadla namhlanje, but ithini yona induna ukuthi ngigadla noma ngingagadli? Hayi, induna ithi angigadli. So, as I was saying, you need to look at the role that traditional leaders are playing in today's society. Are they respected as much as our councillors? Do they have the authority that councillors have, especially in rural areas, far-flung rural areas? There are things that happen in rural areas that do not require the state and its apparatus. However, it does require induna or a chief to step in. You know, we go through life looking at things in a monolithic manner. But when we are faced with certain things, we sit back and we start to rationalize what has the state created in us for us not to even acknowledge traditional leadership as the apex or as apex leadership that should exist in our country, especially in traditional areas. America has solved this to some extent by having reserves and reserves having a set of rules that belong to people that live within them. However, due to our historical context, suggesting such things is quite tiresome. So I wouldn't want to say we should have reserves or areas where the state jurisdiction stops, because if you are coming to an event and you fight with somebody, you smack him, boom, he has a blue eye. Traditional sense says you can go to a police station, open a case of common assaults and have me arrested. But before SAPS comes, ithini induna about my action? Was it warranted for me to hit someone? Now these are the paradoxical elements that we need to look at, that what do traditional leaders need to do for such recognition to be bestowed upon them before the state takes over? But secondly, the problem that I am observing, or as society is observing, is the manner in which some traditional leaders overstep their mark in terms of advocating for certain political parties. I'll make an example of this. And I've got two. One very recently. We remember a State of the Nation address where a member of parliament stood up and made baseless allegations on a member of the EFF. He was then taken to task with it. And recently, we just learned that a member of the royal family in Limpopo actually wrote a letter to the ANC saying that you left Boy Mamabolo, you left him out to dry. You should have helped him in this case. Now, you're seeing somebody that is a royal, somebody that is not elected, speaking to a political party about a member of parliament that was elected into this position, saying that they should have done or should have played a better role. This shouldn't have happened. because they should have maintained their non-partisan stand on whether they believe the ANC did what they did and why they did what they did. But another example is of the Abatembu king, Ubelekaya Dalinjebo. The king endorsed yet again the EFF leading up to the elections, and he got a very nice Mercedes. If I could endorse the Red Berets, can I get a Mercedes? But you then see that for him saying, I endorse these people, it then takes him and his clan or Abantu Bake in a direction where 10 years later, 10 years before, he had endorsed the DA. So now what does that say about a traditional leader that endorses different political parties depending on the political climate of the time? He ought to be as neutral as they come. The Traditional and Khoisan Leaders Act 3 of 2019, Section 1, Subsection 2A, speaks to this. It speaks to traditional leaders not using and utilizing resources to promote and push any member of any political party for any election. But we see this happening. We see our traditional leaders being chum-chum with people, with political party leadership. We're not saying that they shouldn't socialize, but we need to then draw a line in terms of their importance in the community. Because if I belong to a certain political party and my chief belongs to another political party, then we are in a disagreement. And how am I going to then respect him as a village elder? Now, all of these things are things that we need to look at, especially in a democratic dispensation. More importantly, the rise of traditional leaders being killed. We see this happening every single day. I come from KZN where I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 30 traditional leaders have been killed since 2012. Here in Mpumalanga, there's a traditional leader that was killed. In 2021, 2 were killed, and 1 is suspected to be a hit from their parent because of a land dispute. So now we need to ask ourselves, in a democratic country, how are these traditional leaders aiding in the development of democracy, but at the same time instilling a sense of culturalism and respect within our communities? I can't speak for suburban area or suburban life. I've never lived there. But coming from the countryside, ithini nduna becomes the one word that older people till today still say. Before anything should happen, ithini nduna. Because to them, that is the apex of leadership. So we then look at these things and we ask ourselves, Dr. Uguti, what is the public perception? What do the public, what do people that are probably not in this room, sitting at home watching us, what do they say about traditional leadership? And why do they think that traditional leadership ought to be respected? Today we live in a world where young people can just speak as and when they want, to whomever. They never follow protocol. Hence why I said all protocol observed. It's out of respect. But we're now dealing with a generation that says we're removing respect. We now want to look at logic, which is something that is a culture shock to us, not only as a democracy, but to us as people that have grown up in a certain structure that has had traditional leadership at the apex. So in closing, I'd like to put the question to you, Doctor, or to the traditional leadership that are amongst us. What is it that you do for your community versus what the community does for you? Because everybody, even people that live in suburban areas, are asking councillors, what are you going to do for me? Why hasn't traditional leadership stepped up and said, from the stipends that I'm getting from government, from these, every time I have a council meeting, these offerings that my people are giving to me, how can I better distribute this to the people that I govern? Because an ethical leadership is a leadership that takes care of its people, and in turn, its people will take care of them. I thank you.
Thank you so much to Mr. Kanya Vilagazi. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're writing down your question. As he mentioned so many things, the issues of imbalances that needs to be addressed, the role of traditional leaders in our political landscape, the issues of land dispute. I want to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that you have our audience online who are participating in this conversation, and we're also going to give our panelists a chance to respond to some of these questions. Without any waste of time, we're going to call Ms. Bonolo Magala to come forward, ladies and gentlemen, to address us. Let us give her the hand of applause as she's coming forward.
Good morning, everyone. In my language, I'll say Dumela Mbagolo, Alusiame. Because I don't want to get in trouble, I'm going to say all protocol observed. And it's a great honor for me to be here. I'm embarrassed to say that this is actually my first time in Mpumalanga. So I'm happy to be here. As the program manager said earlier, program director said earlier, I come from the University of Pretoria at the Center for Human Rights. So because this, I'm quite short, so I'm trying to manage the mic. Because this is a conversation around thought leadership, I do want to make a note that some parts of my talk may be a bit theoretical, but I think it is important for us as a people that are interested in nation building to think about theoretical frameworks, but also think about what those look like in practice. But before I get to what I've noted in my thinking and my presentation, I do want to go back to something that the doctor has said and something that Kaya has said, which speaks to this complex and paradoxical role of traditional leadership and this idea of endorsing political parties. I think you know, if we get onto that, so I want to reflect particularly on the fact that traditional leadership and traditional leaders must to some degree try to stay away from partisan politics, otherwise you lose legitimacy, democratic legitimacy in that sense. For now, your legitimacy stems from positive influence and the role that you play in your community as the custodian of customary law and culture. And so if you end up finding yourself becoming a political agent, you lose some sort of legitimacy. And I want to make an example about Zimbabwe, for an example. You would know that over the years, Zimbabwe, as a country in SADC, has been accused quite a lot of rigging elections. And we have seen the constitution of Zimbabwe clearly speaks to the fact that traditional leaders should be non-partisan and apolitical. I think the apolitical part is a bit tricky. The non-partisan one makes sense because you can be non-partisan and equally be political. But what we have seen with Zimbabwe in particular, with ZANU-PF, where there's a lot of corruption that is happening there, ZANU-PF giving traditional leaders massive cars, lots of money to mobilize voters for them, and to that degree, they lose some sort of legitimacy. Well, this is a thing that I'm throwing in the room that I think we should reflect about, that how do we balance this complex nature of traditional leadership and the one of democratic elected leaders, and ensuring that traditional leaders do not lose legitimacy, but equally play a significant role in the nation building and in the political landscape in South Africa. Now, I want to look at, are you fixing the mic for me? Thank you. I want to look at particularly democratic legitimacy and the role of traditional leaders in a democratic state. So a very good historical background has been laid by our doctor here, and now I want us to take the conversation to here we are as a country, as the commissioner said earlier, a country that has a relatively young democracy of 30 years, and a country that has quite a lot of beautiful things to celebrate, but equally a country that has quite a lot of things that we should lament upon. If we think about the constant democratic disillusionment that exists among young people, I must say I'm a little disappointed because I don't see quite a lot of young people in the room. But I think we can agree that, and I'll touch on this later when I reflect on voter apathy among young people. I think we can agree that there's a constant democratic disillusionment of some sort, a persistent democratic disillusionment of some sort among young people. There is some political dissatisfaction of some sort, and therefore when we want to think about democratic or democracy and its legitimacy in South Africa, and how do we then locate the role of traditional leaders in shaping the democracy of South Africa. Now, when we think about democratic legitimacy, it should be understood under the following elements. And number one of them would be constitutionality, which means that government must be based on the mandate of the governed, as well as on principles of rules, conventions, which form the core state. And secondly, when we think about democratic legitimacy, it should be referred on accountability, which implies that those holding official and representative positions do so on behalf of the governed, and in this case, the governed will be the electorate and must submit to measures aimed to transparency and accountability. And lastly, when we think about democratic legitimacy, we should think about it through the lenses of participation that requires that the governed must be actively involved in decision-making processes and not be excluded from them. And of course, this conversation is an interesting one that oftentimes when we theorize these things, it's easy for us to talk about public participation and things around citizens being fully involved in decision-making processes, in policy formations, in laws. But in practice, one often asks the question that do we really see meaningful participation of citizens, or is it a procedural thing where we say we had this odd number of communities that we've engaged with around this policy formation, and therefore we are going to pass on this legislature. And two, one of the things that I think we can reflect on is what I call popular sovereignty and popular participation as a constitutional principle. And what I mean by that is that democracies need internal mechanisms to sustain themselves. And key to this is the capacity to citizens, or rather the capacity of citizens to act collectively to hold governments to account and to ensure that they respond to their voters. However, there has been challenges in ensuring that the will of the people permeates in the inner workings of government, and of governments, and because activities in which people participate are not designated to give them a voice when it comes to decision-making processes. And therefore, it's important that citizens have what is called social capital and civic tradition, as this is a sign of good governance. Now, it may be argued then that there are various forms of participation, hence the responsibility should not only lie with political parties, but that should be reflected in other segments of societies. And for the purpose of this conversation, traditional leaders are one of them. Now, moving from this idea of what then democratic legitimacy looks like, as I reflected earlier, that it speaks to constitutionality, it speaks to accountability, it speaks to participation, then what does that look like for traditional leaders? Now, the task of traditional leaders is to strengthen and consolidate democracy. The task of strengthening and consolidating democracy requires the participation of all leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders, elected leaders. And traditional leaders must constitute part of the leadership that is leading a transforming South Africa to a better life for all. So if we want to reimagine South Africa that contradicts our current reality, if we want to reimagine a South Africa that is not a South Africa that has the highest rate of gender-based violence in the world, if we want to reimagine a South Africa that is not a South Africa that is one of the most unequal states in the world, if we want to reimagine a South Africa where the rate of unemployment keeps growing, traditional leaders need to be a part of that process. If we want to reimagine broadly a South Africa that contradicts our current reality, it means that traditional leaders should not and cannot be left at the periphery of the workings of the state, cannot be left at the periphery of the workings of the public sector. And this then means that both traditional leaders, the government, civil society organizations, members of academia, community-based organizations should come together as a collective to reimagine a South Africa that looks differently from what we have at the moment. And therefore, we have seen this, constitutionally, the Constitution of South Africa does recognize the role of traditional leaders, particularly that of a consultative role and of an advisory role towards governance. And in particular, I think one of my colleagues mentioned the issue around land as well. One of the things, I come from a rural community, Komuruleng in Rustenburg. And we have seen how land has been allocated, and I must mention that it's been an interesting process to watch how the parceling of land has been done in a very, equitable way, in a very equal manner. But of course, if we are to think about the gendered lenses that exist there as well, it's a conversation around how many female or women traditional leaders do we have? In a community that I come from, I just turned 40 2 weeks ago, and I am unmarried, and I do not have a child. And my younger cousins, who are in their 30s and married and have children, become part of lobola negotiation processes, and I can't negotiate lobola. Even though I'm 40 and way older than them and have degrees, because I don't have a husband and I don't have a child, right? And so these are some of the things, I make this example that these are some of the things that the patriarchal system that exists within ways in which we arrange ourselves in traditional communities. And I think, I'm wondering also just in this room if there are any female traditional leaders by a show of hand. Do we have? Female traditional leaders? Anyone? That's an interesting conversation to have. And I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to cause trouble. I recognize the cultural dynamics that exist, but I think it is an interesting conversation to have that, as the commissioner was saying earlier, that the spaces and positions of power in the state, and we recognize how women should occupy these positions of power and equal representation of women in electoral processes. So I'm hoping that as we engage collectively in shaping our democracy, perhaps we should think about what it looks like to have a female political leaders. I was just digressing there. It was a point I thought I should mention. And therefore, I think also one of the things that are important and speaks to the complex and the paradoxical nature of traditional leaders is this idea that traditional leaders serve, as I mentioned earlier, as advisory bodies and as consultative bodies, and they should play a significant role in mobilizing community members to participate in electoral processes and encouraging voter registration and voter turnout. South Africa is going into general elections next year, and particularly when it comes to young people, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a democratic disillusionment, but this is not, an exception for South Africa. Globally, young people have been labeled as an apathetic and uninterested in formal democratic processes, and this is due to the consistently decreasing level of voter turnout in elections. Of course, while there's the reality, whilst South Africa has, experienced a similar trend of lower voter registration and lower voter turnout, South African youth are far, far from being apathetic. Rather, South African youth are highly critical of political leaders, highly critical of traditional leaders, and parties who they feel have ignored their needs and failed to engage with them meaningfully. Statistically, since this is a meeting organized by the IEC, so I think I should go on to statistics from the IEC. At the close of the last voter registration conducted by the IEC, only 16% of 18 to 19-year-olds eligible to vote registered to vote, alongside 49% of eligible 20 to 29-year-olds. Arguably, the reason for this decline in young people registering to vote is that many young people are despondent about formal democratic processes like elections. Now, here's a question. The statistics are there. It shows that there's a lower voter turnout. We've got a couple of months before we go into the elections. And I want to pose a challenge to traditional leaders that are in the room. Let's collectively think about is that what is it that we are going to do to ensure that our young people go to the polls? In comparison to other countries on the continent, our laws allow us to explore other forms of political participation, where young people can go to the streets or protest, or they can go and protest on social media or on Twitter, but you can't do that in certain countries because the laws don't allow to do that. So while there's an opportunity for young South Africans, as I mentioned, that they aren't politically apathetic, while there's an opportunity for alternative forms of political participation, we do want to see young people at the polls. If you cannot continue to criticize the state, you cannot continue to speak about the failures of the state, sitting at the periphery of the state, and when it is time to go to the polls, you don't go to the polls and vote. And now the question is that how do we capacitate, and I use this word respectfully, how do we capacitate traditional leaders to ensure that they become a powerful voice that mobilizes young South Africans to vote? Because from 2016 to 2019 to 2021, we have seen an incremental decline in voter turnout among young people. And this is a role that traditional leaders could play. But one could also argue that the culture of young people and traditional leaders is a bit awkward, isn't it? If we are to consider things like respectability politics. For a moment, when I mentioned the idea about women leadership, I could see the elders in the room frowned a bit. And this is a reality because of the the context we find ourselves in as Africans. The hierarchical roles that exist, there's little room for young people. Again, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked when I said how many female traditional leaders are in the room. I'm going to ask how many young traditional leaders are in the room. It is not a rhetorical question. By a show of hands, are there any young traditional leaders in the room? Oh, I like that. And so young people oftentimes as well find it difficult to engage with older leaders. And I think one of the things that we should think about is this intergenerational conversation. Let's create a space for young leaders as well to be part of what is happening in their broader society, because we cannot think about nation building and think about it in different segments where there's a unilateral approach of how things should be done. I think as a people, we need to move to a place where all the different sectors of society work together. So I'm happy to see that there's a young traditional leader in the room. I still lament that there's no female traditional leader in the room. And of course, one of the other ways that traditional leaders can serve in democratic consolidation in Africa, in South Africa, is this idea around civic education. And oftentimes we think that the role of civic education is something that should only be done by, civil society organizations, should only be done by the IEC. I think traditional leaders have a mandate to some degree to work closely with IEC, to work closely with civil society organizations, to work closely with academic institutions in ensuring that the civic education and to create also a platform and space to engage about service delivery. Traditional leadership exists within the framework of local government, and that's where the conversation around service delivery is important. And I think that one of the most significant roles that traditional leaders can play is to serve as a bridge between communities and government, to close the democratic gap that exists between communities and government, to ensure that you become the voice for your community, to ensure that you bring up issues of service delivery, to ensure that if as my colleagues have mentioned earlier, that traditional leaders have been involved in things like conflict resolutions and dispute, but beyond that, the state has a commitment to service delivery, and traditional leaders should be able to serve as a bridge that closes the democratic gaps and ensure that there are checks and balances. Now, as I conclude, I think we can agree that traditional leaders in South Africa play a somewhat limited role in democratic elections compared to their historical and governance functions. And here are some of the key points regarding the role of their role in South Africa's democratic elections. One being the limited direct political participation. Traditional leaders themselves do not run for political office, we know that, or hold any political and formal position. They do not stand for elections in the same way as the representative political leaders do. Now, South Africa is moving from 2016 local government election, and 2021 local government elections. South Africa moved into this idea of coalition governments. So now the question to ask is that, do political parties ever consider the significant role of traditional leadership in the formation of coalition government? Of course, I understand that the mandate is different, but when we think about democratic legitimacy, as I mentioned earlier, we must think about participation. To what extent, again, this is a question, to what extent do political parties actually engage with traditional leaders when they think about coalition government formation? We saw it in 2016. It caught us off guard when the IEC made an announcement that there's no party that has the 50+1 majority in the city of Johannesburg, Tshwane, Nelson Mandela. There was a bit of a chaos, and political parties had to think quickly about what needs to be done to form government. But we should have learned from 2016, we should have learned from 2021, and in an event that we find ourselves in that position in 2024, where do we see the role of traditional leaders engaging with political parties, engaging with the IEC in forming coalition governments? But also some limitations also that are there. It's limitations around the fact that South Africa's post-apartheid constitution and legal framework emphasizes democratic principles, including separation of traditional leadership from political office. This means that traditional leaders are not part of formal government structures, but rather serve as cultural and community features, as I mentioned earlier, that they serve as custodians. And so I think as I conclude, because I have a feeling that I've run out of time, because I see the program director just moved slightly, I think it's important for us to when we think about the future of elected political leaders and that of traditional leaders, is that the functionality of local government depends on finding a common ground between elected officials and traditional authorities. Infrastructural development in rural areas remain a complex challenge requiring collaboration between the various stakeholders. And therefore, how do we imagine these two stakeholders working together to ensuring that there's development? And one of the things that I think makes it a bit complex and paradoxical is the fact that the space is a little closed for us as a people to reimagine the kind of South Africa that we want to see, to reimagine and be creative in ways in which we want to see South Africa. And perhaps at the end of this conversation, I'm hoping that it will land at a point where, as a collective, we have some sort of an idea of how we can have these two stakeholders that are important, the elected political representatives and the traditional leaders, work together towards democratic consolidation in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Ms. Bonolo. Ladies and gentlemen, the conversation continues as she touches on the issue of nation building in South Africa, on how traditional leaders can play a role in making sure that young people participate in the issue of taking part in elections, on the issue of making sure that we reimagine South Africa as a better country, in making sure that they take part in the issue of transformation. We're going to call Kgoshi Mokoena to come forward, ladies and gentlemen. As the conversation continue, also continue to write down your question, because Ms. Bonolo has mentioned a lot of things. Do political parties have to work with traditional leaders? There is so much that she mentioned. I'm hoping that you are writing your question. Kgoshi Mokoena, the stage is yours.
To our dynamic and excellent program director, let me acknowledge the presence of our commissioner, Ubabe Umashini Nutlen, and all commissioners, my panelists. I want to say I am privileged and honored to address in the presence of leaders of our country in a form of the Deputy Chairperson of the Provincial House, Inkosi Uyende, Wasokenyaneni. I'm happy that I'm addressing this gathering in the presence of members of the executive in the Provincial House, Inkosi R.A. Inkosi, Kgosi Moepi. I'm fortunate to address this gathering in the presence of the chairperson of the Ehlanzeni local house, Inkosi K.M. Nkosi. It is exciting to address this gathering in the presence of a member of the Provincial House, Inkosi Ngomane. uSizwe Bondaba Ezitha. Politicians, leaders will come and go. Amakhosi will remain. As Amakhosi, we note some comments by some people who say Kwame Nkrumah was the best leader in the country, in the continent. To us as traditional leaders, he is our enemy. The enemy that you can think of in the country amongst them is Kwame Nkrumah. During his time as the president of Ghana, he removed all Amakhosi and deposed them from their positions, calling them feudal lords. Thanks God, the powers of Africa and the powers of our ancestors dawned, and people revolt against him, and he was removed. We're celebrating even today. Good riddance. It is not wrong when politicians go to business people and those who are moneyed to ask for donations and some tools of trade to enable them to do their work. They will be given those incentives, they will be given money. We accept as Amakhosi, there's nothing wrong with it. Because they must work, they must campaign, they must recruit, and do all those sort manner of things. As Amakhosi was saying, there is nothing wrong. And they are being given those incentives. Some of the business people, they even buy trucks, cars, buses for some political parties. As Amakhosi was saying, there is nothing wrong. A question is that those who are saying it is wrong for the EFF to buy good vehicles for the Queen of Bapedi, who they gave last year. There are some people who are saying it was wrong for buying King Talinjebo a car. But when those people are buying cars for politicians, there's nothing wrong. But when they buy for Amakhosi, it is wrong. Shame on you. Leadership, if I knew that the discussion would be about Amakhosi, I would have invited Amakhosi to be in their large numbers here. Even to respond to the question by Her Royal Highness as to whether are they female traditional leaders here. A bit of umhabulo, just to assist people that when they live here, they are much educated than when they came here. We're having the leader of our delegation that goes to the National House. It's a woman, Nkosi Khulile Mkhatshwa. She's in the executive of the National House, elected by us, some Thumelale. Amakhosi in Mpumalanga, we are 61. In the 61, we deemed it fit and proper to elect her as a woman to go and represent us there. Secondly, in the 61, we deemed it necessary to elect Khoshiradi Muthlala, who is a woman, to be in the executive of the Provincial House. In the executive, were only 6. Can you imagine, in the whole 61, but with Amakhosi in the province who are women, there are only 6. And in the whole 6, all of them are in good positions. Khoshiradi Muthlala in the executive. The second one is Nkosi Mkhatshwa Wasemfumbeni. She is chairing one of the serious and best committees in the Provincial House. The other 2 just came in now, the Khoshi from Mashile, the other one from Maluka. All the other Amakhosi are in key positions. There is no Nkosi who is a woman who is idling, sitting somewhere there simply because she is a woman. Amakhosi that was in Mpumalanga. Now, in our culture, you are an inkosi, you are, when you are still conceived by uNdlunkulu ebukhosini. You are an inkosi. That's why even if I am 18 years, immediately I am coronated. The whole isizwe, sakaMachibela, but ubaba wethu. Being 18 years, therefore, Her Royal Highness, there is no young inkosi in our culture. There is no young inkosi. This is a free umkhabulo to some of you. To come for free. I won't charge you for anything. Now, the new legislation in our country, the TKLA, it was passed. We made submission as Amakos, made submission to Parliament, even to the Portfolio Committee. I personally flew to Cape Town with members from the National House. I was representing my organization of Amakos organization, Contralesa, when the Provincial House here sent a delegation to go to Cape Town. We made submission in trying to improve that bill. Unfortunately, all our submissions were ignored. Hence, we wrote a very powerful memorandum to our president to say, this legislation is about us. It's not talking to us anyway. And you'll be surprised to say, we are happy that the Concords declared it unconstitutional. You'll be surprised that Amakosi was supporting that decision of the Concords, but for other reasons. Not for the reasons that was outlined by those who went to court. Can you imagine? It is saying few members of the royal family, they can sit and decide about your fate without you participating. The following day, you will be removed. That's what they say. That was crafted by people in those air-conditioned offices with those roving chairs in parliament without consulting us properly. We are saying no to it. Now, here in Mpumalanga, we had a method and a system that we're using with IEC, Comrade Glenn. We used to have that MOU that we used to work so nicely, where the IEC will come to us as Amakosi to say, what can we do in making sure this voter apathy, how can we deal with it? As Amakosi, there's something that they were doing. And it was assisting because each and every Inkosi in Mpumalanga were able to have our MBZOs, our meetings, where we invite our people and conduct voter education. We invite IEC to be there so that they assist us when we conduct this voter education. And our people were voting their large numbers. I don't know, IEC in Mpumalanga, they were so bewitched. They dumped that arrangement. That's why abantu voter dropped. Nata Makosi, Sati, let's fold our hands. We'll just go and allow voters who vote on us. We'll just keep quiet. I think IEC, they've withdrawn what we used to do, what was a very good thing. It was better than all provinces. Unfortunately, it was discontinued. I hope it will come back. As Tamakosi, we don't have no-go areas. We allow political parties to campaign freely. They don't pay even a cent when they campaign in our areas. And even now, I want to commit Amakosi, that's what we're doing. Even next year, that's what's going to happen. You won't see a no-go area here in Mpumalanga. Unless some other areas, yes, maybe it's happening, but not here. And as Amakosi, we want to assure everybody that come to our offices. All our doors are open. The only thing that I want to, I want to allay the fears from people to say, maybe Amakosi, we are forcing people to vote in a particular direction. Noticing Abantu, we might have our own organizations that we are comfortable with, but there's no way I will address a community as an inkosi. Ngithi nina abantu bami nonke batho ba ka kamukaka le nna kere from today le tla nkwa ye a sa ye nkwa o vota le nna o tla kwa mmagwe. We're not saying that. No. Angeke sithi nina abantu bami niyangizwa namhla ngenkosi yenu ngithi mina nonke kusuka la amano vota ngapha uma ningayi uzozwa msuno kanyoka. No, we're not doing that. No. No. We can't do that as Amakhosi. We don't. Our people are free. Now, not our wish as Amakhosi, people must wake up today here. Even those who are slumbering, please shake them a bit. We don't want in our country to be like what is happening in other countries, where voters' roll is not accessible to other people, but only to some individuals. We don't want the situation where in a voting station, if I am an observer of a particular organization, if it is clear that here we are walloping some people, but you can't celebrate. If you celebrate, it is an offense, you go to jail. I'm happy our IEC, they're not doing it. They're not doing it. So, in other countries, those who are in power, they will say, if they are getting a report in a particular voting station, hey, we're counting here and the ballots are about to finish, we're not waiting. They will be told, but count until I win. Stay away from people who are benefiting from you. Hey, let me repeat this. Stay away from people who are benefiting from you. I will tell you why. Because those people, even when you are wrong, they will clap hands for you because they're always doing what? Benefiting from you. Our challenge in the country is because we are always associate ourselves with people who are benefiting from me. And when I give them in wrong instructions, they will take it simply because they are benefiting from me. Life is like a trip. The only challenge is that in this trip, there is no Google map. You have to navigate yourself to know your destination. Amakhosi can be trusted, unlike ESCOM. I have spoken. Thank you very much.
Hoshim Kwena, he's saying, unlike ESCOM, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Kukulanga, I feel like this gathering is about mending relationships between the IEC and the traditional leaders, and also the traditional leaders and government officials, because Hoshim Kwena is not happy. As we proceed with our program, ladies and gentlemen. A lot has been said since we have started about the issue of the role of traditional leaders. I like what Ms. Bonolo said, whether there are women who are traditional leaders, and Hoshim Kwena has mentioned that. But I wonder whether the number 6 is enough for women who are traditional leaders. I'm glad the fact that he's here. He's going to answer those questions, ladies and gentlemen. I think we have arrived here as our audience online. They are also participating, and I believe you also have your own questions you have written down, because our panel has been waiting to respond to some of these questions. I will start with Tsakani Matebula. Uthi ubukhosi bondabezitha, their role is key yet neglected. More budget is needed since they have so much to implement, being custodian of our community identity in terms of language, cultural practices, values. Dr. Majola, you spoke a lot about the origin, where traditional leaders are coming from, and the role in our society that traditional leaders they are playing. And here they are talking about the budget that is not sufficient. There's still more that needs to be done in helping traditional leaders in our society.
The budget one is difficult for me. I think there are people who can talk about it here. But I think, you know, in terms of the promotion of our languages, or intellectualization of our languages and our tradition and our culture, I could agree that there is a need to, you know, be more visible. And I think the limited visibility is due to the shortage of funds to be out there. We, for instance, are here now in this event, and we have recently adopted sign language, but we do not have somebody who's speaking or using sign language to communicate in order to accommodate the diversity. But furthermore, we only use English, and that's the only language that we use. We have not taken upon ourselves to check what do the majority understand here. And thanks to the commissioner as well as Undabezita, because they've tried to code switch, unlike most of us. But I would agree that there is a need for rechanneling of funds so that we can be able to promote this, both of these traditions and as well as our languages.
I would like Mr. Vilagazi to also respond on that question.
Well, I think the issue of budgets is quite important because, like I said, Amakosi they interact with the community at grassroots level, but now the thing is, how then do we channel that money for Amakosi to do the work that they do in the community and still hold them accountable? Because it's the accountability part that then becomes an issue. That how then do we hold accountable a leader of a community that says, no, because that family needed Ujojo tank, I bought it at builders and not going through the traditional routes, the PMFA routes. So these are the challenges that we need to start looking at and investigating in terms of how to make the situation better.
We have another question from Jimmy Kirk. What is the relevance of traditional leaders in a democratic dispensation when its role and functions are taken by certain government departments? Bonolo, you spoke about traditional leaders playing a role into our democratic society.
Thank you. I think that's a very important question, and to be honest, is something that I had been battling with when I was preparing for this conversation. That if we are to speak about democracy and particularly think about it along the lines of representative democracy, where we have elected leaders that represent us, then is there a place for traditional leaders in democratic consolidation in South Africa? If the answer is no, then we are being unfair to ourselves as a people. If you are to think about, and Dr. Majola did that very well for us, where he located the role of traditional leaders from historically, if you are to think about even the formation of the African National Congress in 1912, there was a strong and powerful role that traditional leaders have played. But it's almost like a schizophrenic space to occupy, because if you are to think about how government is arranged, the mandate of elected leaders is very clear. The mandate of the state is very clear when it comes to governance framework. But when it comes to governance framework and traditional leaders, the mandate is not clear. But it does not necessarily mean that there's no place for them. And that's why I highlighted earlier that the important role that they play in democratic consolidation is that of advisory, is that of consultative role, but also custodians of customary law and customary and culture, and also ensuring that they close the democratic gap to hold the state accountable. So we can't leave them at the margins of governance framework and how the state is being governed, even though there may not be provisions. But the fact that COCTA recognizes them and there's House of Traditional Leaders, it means that there's a place for them. So it's a complex one, but there's a place for them in our democracy.
Before we go to our audience, there is another comment here. Someone is saying the establishment of the Department of Traditional Leaders at a national level, is it necessary when they do not have permanent seats?
I'll ask my colleague to answer that. But I think one of the things that I saw COCTA doing, particularly in a province where I come from in Northwest, with the Bafokeng tribe and the Bakatla tribe, it's two things. It's the capacity building and the strengthening cohesion between traditional leaders and democratic elected leaders, right? And for the Bakatla tribe as well, what we have seen is that our king had been taken to court for corruption. And when he was taken to court for corruption, this judicial review process, when he was taken to court for corruption, when he was then found guilty, he was unseated, blah, blah, blah. It's a long, complex story. But you see that the provisions that exist in that ministry, to some degree, gives communities powers to do something if traditional leaders fail them. But I often say the difference between traditional leaders and elected leaders, especially when it comes to issue of accountability and corruption and integrity and transparency and so on and so forth, I think it's not purely something that we should put on communities. It's something that traditional leaders should own themselves, because it's a generational thing. It is an inherent thing. It is a God-given thing. It is a bloodline thing. So the resources that are given to them, they should actually own those and ensure that there's transparency and there's lack of corruption and there's good governance in that. But in an event that there isn't, then we can go through the process of judicial review where the ministry can play that significant role in doing that. I don't know if my colleague wants to add to that.
I think to add on to that from that question, Ngozi spoke about political leaders coming and going, but Ubkosi being there. And that's the truth. Unfortunately, I think we are living in a society which he himself admitted that politicians ignore traditional leaders. They blue tick them. When it comes to things that are important to traditional leaders, politicians would rather move to another point, then address it. But when it comes to elections, they then are reminded of them and their significant role. But second to that, when I spoke about them giving political parties cozying up to traditional leaders and giving them gifts, I was saying that they should be beyond reproach. Nobody should in any shape, form or manner say, no, we know this leader, he trusts us because we do X and Y for them. And that's what I was trying to put forward, that ubukhosi into ebalekile into eyisiqi sesizwe sethu okuyiyona ekuyinto emele sihloniphe above politicians that come and go and will represent a certain narrative of any dispensation at any given time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vilakazi. Any questions on the floor? I see a hand there. Can we give her the mic?
Thank you.
Bonani, I'll start by saying all the protocol observed. I will start by accountability. When we're talking about a traditional leader, we're talking about someone who's always there to be accounted for their action, meaning that they don't go after election. We're also talking about a elected leader. We're talking about the particular individuals who come to us and also participate and also leave at and neglect us. So in terms of these two, they should work together. Because when we're talking about a traditional leader, we're talking about a person who occupied a particular position, who is there to be accountable for every action that take place. And also to talk about the eliminations that take place in South Africa of killing the leaders. We need the leaders to uphold our roots. We need the traditional leaders to make sure that we know our dignity. We are living in the 21st century where South Africans have lost their identity. They kill each other because of what have happened during the colonizations that took place in the 1994.
But are they accountable? Traditional leaders, are they accountable as you're speaking about accountability?
Yes, as I'm speaking about accountability, I believe that they are accountable. The reason I say that, when you need them, you always find them. Meaning that you cannot just write report and send to the report and also write emails and not find them, because there is a lack of participation and communication after the election have taken place. So we need those two to work together, to observe and also to make sure that South Africa became stable, because we have lost our stability. Instead of that, we are losing people who are being killed daily. We are facing a rape. There is no accountability. So who do we blame? If ever we want leadership to work with traditional leadership, we must create a sense of belonging amongst the individuals and also the leaders, meaning that they should work in collaboration. A servant leader, yes, is there to provide for the people as a whole, but they should not neglect the traditional leaders, because together they have the ethics, they have the morals, they have the ability to uphold the nation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Another hand. She talks about stability and accountability for traditional leaders. Another hand.
My name is Dr. Tatu. I'm an academic. Hello. Yes.
We can't hear you, sir. Can you ask them to help you with the mic? Another hand.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Program Director, and all protocol is observed. You see, when Dr. Majola was speaking to us, and as and when I was sitting down listening to all the response from the colleagues, I got reminded of Commissioner, one of the most powerful ways of a very prominent professor, right? An African-American professor, Professor John Clegg. He said, and I quote quickly, Program Director, to control people, you must first control how they think about themselves and how they regard history and culture. When your conqueror, Commissioner, when your conqueror makes you feel ashamed of your culture and history, he needs no prison and no chains to hold you, close quote. I'm deliberately citing this for two paradoxical reasons, right? One is to acknowledge, the prominent role that is played by traditional authorities. Dr. Majola gave a little bit of a contextual background to that effect. But also, number two, Ndabezitha, to question the paucity of the active role of traditional authorities in pushing the transformational agenda, right? A transformational agenda program director that is Afrocentric in nature. That's what the team talks about. All in an effort to ensure that we build prospects for reconstruction. And if we want to build prospects for reconstruction, Ndabezitha, we need to ask ourselves difficult questions. That is what scholarship is about. To ask, to respectfully question authority. For instance, prompt director, without wasting time, we need to ask ourselves question, what is wrong with Africa, right? Why is it that in 3 decades into democracy, we still don't see the active role of traditional authorities in addressing a transformational agenda that is Afrocentric in nature? People are complaining about the issue of land. Dr. Majola touched the land dispossession. We have EFF. EFF has prominently came in public platform and advocate an alternative to a land reform. But we have never seen traditional authorities, right? COVID-19, why is it that we have pharmaceutical companies in Africa producing for Africans, right? And people are working there are Africans, but they are not owned by Africans. What is wrong with Africa? Where is the role of traditional leadership in addressing a transformational agenda that is Afrocentric in nature? In conclusion, when I read that theme, right, my assumption, Ndabezitha, was perhaps what this seminar needs to do is to spend time on the first part of it, an Afrocentric analysis. But much of what we did was, to spend much more time to a contrary, which is a modernity theory. And that's where the problem is in South Africa. Where is the voice of traditional authority in all these issues that affect our impoverished people in the ground? Land, for instance. Amakosi are custodians of land, but they seem to be quiet. We have EFF, we have professors, Professor Ruth Hall, right? You go to Zimbabwe, Professor Sam Moyo. All these people are writing quite extensive on issues of land. But where is the voice of African authority? Thank you so much.
Dr. Majola, I want you to come in. Where is the voice of traditional leaders? Because the gentleman on the floor is talking about the transformational agenda that could help South Africa to go forward.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very complex one. The manner in which traditional leadership is made up in our country is quite problematic, and may contribute to their voice not being as loud as it should be. What do I mean? It is because it heavily relies on government. So once you rely on somebody, you have very limited abilities to question them, or even to speak contrary to what they move for. Now, I mentioned it, that at times the modern government sort of suppress traditional leaders indirectly, because if I must fund you and I must give you money to survive and I must recognize you, that therefore means that you should operate on the premise that I put forward. You cannot operate outside of that scope. So my thinking is that the limited voice of the traditional leaders is as a result of them not being given space in government to speak truthfully, but to only speak through certain positions within government and not to speak themselves in government. I mean, one would ask themselves a question. The Department of Sports, Art and Culture, why is it not a, and I'm just probably hallucinating, but why is it not a traditional leader who's the minister in that environment? Why is it not a minister? Because that is where you must push for the promotion of our African tradition. So now you must have somebody who's not a custodian to push an agenda that he may be put there because of there's no space within the political environment. Then they must be given the space and they must acclimatize themselves with the environment. But you've got a custodian, you've got a structure. Go to Contralesa and say, Contralesa, who can you deploy to come into this position? So that the voice can be clearly distinguished. But as it is, the voice is hidden and cannot come out clearly because the funding comes from this government. And therefore, whoever challenges this government is going to be limited. Thank you.
I want you to help us in terms of the balance. You spoke about traditional leaders relying on government. And when it's time for elections, you see some other traditional leaders being in front, campaigning for other political parties. Somebody is feeding you, and when it's time to help that particular person, you can't. Because on the other hand, you think of your integrity, as you said that traditional leaders are the custodian of our culture. But traditional leaders cannot sit back and say we are not going to campaign for that political party or for that government because we are relying on that government. How do we balance the two?
Undabezitha mentioned it, but I would not necessarily agree with his articulation. I think initially traditional leaders should be apolitical, and she said it. But it wouldn't mean that they don't have relations with political parties. Because in our minds, and he just mentioned it, when we see somebody associating or being endorsed by someone else, the assumption is that they belong to them. The Abatembu King didn't have to say that there is now an EFF. The whole arrangement that happened there suggested to some and who didn't have the proximity to ask the question that, look, no, it's now EFF. At some point it was DA, at some point it was ANC. Nobody, he never said it, but we make the assumption based on association. So the balance really should be that they should clearly say, look, I don't belong to any political party. But I must be able to therefore endorse anybody who comes. And everybody and anybody should come and they should endorse them. But once they identify with a political party, that becomes a problem. That makes them it makes it difficult to be different. Because then they will say, nobody's EFF, is ANC. And some of the people who don't identify with that will be limited. So that is where the problem is. And I think the apolitical proposition that was made is the one that I move for.
Before our audience and Hoshim Kwena, something that you've touched on, Bonolo, I don't know whether you want to elaborate.
Yes, I think two things here. So there's a budgetary allocation from the state to traditional leaders, right? And that is from the state. And I think we must remember to always separate the state from the political party that governs the state. It is a difficult exercise to do, but the money comes from government. It does not necessarily come from the ANC, even though the ANC is a governing body. And so the fact that there's budgetary allocations for traditional leaders, it should not bind traditional leaders to then support the ANC as the governing state, right? And therefore, my position has always been that, and I agree with you and the way you framed it, the politics of the stomach, and I made an example about what is happening in Zimbabwe at the moment, where traditional leaders have turned into political agents because they are getting money from ZANU-PF. And I think for us to be able to answer this question, we must go back to the Constitution. What is the constitutional provision and what is this that the Constitution say about publicly endorsing a political party. I don't think the Constitution has that provision that says publicly endorse a political party, but I don't think it equally speaks about being apolitical, but it is a position that traditional leaders should take. And it doesn't, if I want to go to an EFF gathering to network, if I want to go to an NC gathering, if I want to go to a DA gathering, by all means, let me do that. But endorsing and publicly aligning yourself with a political party, you are putting yourself in a very, very compromising position.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other traditional leaders who have questions? Because today is their day. Whatever question they have today, it must be answered. I don't see any hands, ladies and gentlemen. Can we please rush with the mic?
Is it disrespectful for me to air my voice because I'm not a traditional leader before a leader comes in to the floor?
It's not wrong, but can we give this gentleman first?
No, I'm not a traditional leader.
In that case, it's settled. Let me air my voice. My brother, you'll come after me. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to appreciate the platform given to us to come and engage on such an important conversation. I am Tshepang Molale, and allow me to start to reference my comment by stating that the Samia tribe in Western Kenya have a saying, and they were lamenting, essentially saying, before there were elephants that came to torment and terrorize us. Now it is development, democracy, and participation. With that saying, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say that it is quite challenging for us to come here and seek to want to talk about the role of traditional leaders who, quote and unquote, are somewhat legislatively marginalized to be the recipient of patronage from government and the powers that be. My argument or my 2 cents contribution to this all-important conversation would be grant traditional leaders political power. Let us amend the Electoral Act to allow for a space for a traditional authority to be in the ballot box so that they too can be in parliament, so that they too can start to receive resources, so that they too can have an independent voice, so that they too can go back into their communities, their constituencies, and bring forth or encourage active participation, active voting, active involvement of their local communities in this all-important political activities. Because if we're going to let traditional leaders to be beholden to politicians, those who have or who are recognized and they've been given power by the Constitution and by other regulations, then we'll forever have these problems that the two speakers have just alluded to, them being marginal, or them being having to expect to be patronaged by certain powers that be, them not having even the power to be in the higher echelons of government in that ministry of COCTA. So let them be given political power so that they can have an active voice, a meaningful voice in our democratic dispensation.
Thank you so much. I want Kgoshi Mokoena to come in. Are you marginalized? Do you want a political voice? Because the gentleman talks about that you also need to be given a voice.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. Section 211 and Section 212 of the Constitution only talks of a recognition with no powers, no function. We even threaten taking government to court as Contralesa and Amakosi in the country. The President, His Excellency, came running and pleaded with yours truly not to take that route. They'll correct it. We are still waiting. In terms of the budget allocations, let me disappoint you. There is no budget for Amakosi. There's only a grant. What a shame. In the African country, African government, black government, traditional leaders don't have a budget, but only a grant. Do you want to know how much are we getting as a grant as a TC? Do you?
Yes.
Each traditional authority is given only 350,000 for the whole year to run your office and come up with developments with that 350,000. While if they do an event where they take only 5 hours event, they spend not less than 700,000 to 800,000. But as Amakosi, we must spend 350,000 for the whole year, servicing our community. That's what we're facing as Amakosi in this country, where there are many Republicans who hate Amakosi with passion. Come and see them next year during election. They will come running. They will even kiss babies who did not even wash. Now, in terms of Amakosi being salaried, they are not salaried. They have been given stipend. Sorry for disappointing you again. There are people here who are so excited about Roman Dutch law instead of their African law. They will tell you how Amakosi, or simply because they prefer to be governed through Roman Dutch law, forgetting and dumping their own law, which is African. Thanks to my brother there who said, why can't we promote our own African law? Hence, we are reviewing our stance after the president said we must not take them to court. We might change our tune. Now, in terms of the land, the voice that we made forced our government, even the Minister of Dadla, to call for an indaba. We're there at Beechwood, all 9 provinces, Contra Lesser, and all the 7 provinces, provincial houses, and the National House, where they promised us to say within 6 months, they are going to make sure that the land is transferred to the original owners, i.e. Amakosi and their people. We are still waiting. All I can say to the leadership here, Lamlangeni, is that we are not going to give up. We are not going to give up. If you feel or think they're going to dampen our spirits, no, they must try next door. It will dawn one day. We'll have people who are going to listen to the cries of Amakosi. In our own country, we don't regret as Amakosi in 1912 when we invited academics to come to join us as Amakosi when we formed the People's Government. We don't regret that. Can you imagine you build your own house, after building the house, but when now you are a beggar in your own house. When you want something, you must beg. Thank you, madam.
Before we go to our audience, Bonolo spoke about you are being part of the nation building, and there's a question here if it is possible for the IEC to capacitate traditional leaders to encourage people to go and vote. Your role in ensuring that society and young people understand their power of voting, what do you do as we are heading to 2024?
Indeed, as I committed earlier on, as Amakosi, we're prepared to partner with our beloved, dynamic, excellent, calculated IEC, as long as they play the ball, not the man. We're available. Come to us, we'll assist you. Look at politicians these days, political parties. When they want audience, they are no more just inviting people on their own. They will come to us as Amakosi and beg us to call people for them, because People now, they've got confidence only. Namakosi, nabafundis. They have lost confidence to all these things. So if you want people to come to Amakosi. Tina, we can assist in the voter education and even to motivate the young ones to come and register and vote. So if they do that, Tina, as Amakosi, we are ready, let them do that. It's a known fact to all of you. If political parties want people to fill up the stadium or the arena, they must say there will be Uchomi, there will be Ubanbani who are singing the song Rabbi Brook, and so on. But Tina Makos, we just invite them to come. Tina, there is nothing that we will poster some artists with the buzz of a corner come, no. So therefore, as Amakosi, we've got so much influence. If they want people to come, we are ready as Amakosi. We'll make sure that the people come and register in their large numbers and they go and vote. Because Tina, we are apolitical. Finally, Lamlangin. One sister of mine in a family meeting, she said, Mdenwam and all of you, Mina, I want to be an exemplary. I want to remain a virgin for the rest of my life so that I am an exemplary to my own children.
Yes, the question is coming to you, Commissioner. As Anthony was asking this question, Ubonga Mdletshe is saying this is directed to the IEC Commission. What does IEC expect Amakosi nezinduna to do in preparation of the elections?
Yes. Thank you, Program Director. Let me take this opportunity to say two things. The first one is to acknowledge that from the inception of the Electoral Commission, and it so happens that at that time I served as the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. And part of the program and the portfolio that I was responsible for was communication, stakeholder management, as well as the part of the democracy and outreach program. And through that program, at that time, we were in a position to raise resources for our outreach, voter education, democracy development. And in that, we forged then this partnership that Hoshi Mkwenya referred to. And it progressed and yielded very positive outcomes in terms of mobilizing our communities, especially those who are within the traditional authorities and institutions. We were in a position to advance resources to Amakosi. Sasihlabe inkomo nje kube isiphihli, noma uyensikazi noma uyale inkomazi noma uya yonke indawo nje la kunamakhosi khona kwakukhona i-capacity ukuthi ilezo igodi nezigodi namakhosi azokwazi ukuthi enze umsebenzi. Ngoba vele sikhuliswe ngiwo lamakhosi. Sasidla inyama nje lapha ensikazi sathi ukuthi hayi inkosi umbuyane nokhumalo no babo mango bazoletha inkomo kuhlatshwe lapha kuphume wonke umuntu kusuke lapho kubhekwe inkomazi kuphume lapho kubheke embuleni yonke lenzawo siyakwadi lokho manje ke kusekube khona i-development in the recent times lebopha letinyawo nezandla lebizwa ngokuthiwa i-MFMA and PFMA. IEC does not make laws. IEC implements the laws. Manje ke sekukhona le mithetho le engikhuluma ngayo. Eseyenze manje kube khona legebe phakathi kwethu nobukhosi. Ukuthi uma uzawukhipha ngisho uzuka ukuthi unikete gogo lapha uthenga isinafu fanele manje ubuye nema receipt fanele uphume ne documentation ethi and ezinye izinto zi classify ukuthi they don't fall under that expenditure. So yiyo ama challenges esinawo engithi cha ithi ngikuchaze nje ngoba siyabonisa siyaxoxa lana kodwa ke thina ke siwumnyango weIEC uma ningasibambi ne executive sinemhlangano nje futhi this afternoon lo sisabona ukuthi ke sixoxisana kanjani ke ukubonisana ukuthi sihlahlela kanjani indlela kule situation ekhona. So the case for enabling and unlocking the resources for umsebenzi ukubambisana namakhosi in principle has been there from inception, and I would like to say, in fact, I was the architecture of that. Now, the former PEO, Mtimand, Ubra Steve, to say how do we mobilize the resources. Similarly, for also, it's the same case faced by the religious and church bodies. That we've had those particular challenges that we say civil society has to play a role, whether it's in terms of NGOs, in terms of what you call traditional institution, or the South African Council of Churches and all those bodies. But the allocation is not there. And on the other side, if we mobilize internationally or otherwise, will that make the Commission and our civil society organization captured? So you know, a food for thought, but Nati will continue to try and see can't we find ways and other alternatives to deal and address with this particular area, because it's very critical, you know. I mean, we are asking the impossible of the civil society across all its manifestations, including the traditional institutions. But where there's a will, there's a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mashinini. Any question on the floor? Can we take at least 3 questions so that our panel will be able to answer all of them? 3 questions. I see 2 hands there. Okay, you can start. Oh, okay.
Sibonga kakhulu lamlangeni bingelele. Une comment mhlambe itawugcina nge-question, but one of the mistakes that I think all of us have made, maybe we need to correct it, is that we moved from the frames of the topic and we discussed from modernity. And I believe that Afrocentrism is a way that seeks to push away modernity. Because the moment you explain the role of traditional leaders using the glances of modernity, then you are starting from a wrong premise and from the wrong fruits. That is why even when you quote the Constitution, even when you speak about public participation, even when you speak about lawmaking, we are going to look at it from the angle of modernity. And modernity is what the topic seeks to say, it's a problem. And it's our contemporary problem. Then the topic seeks to say, we can reconstruct this. And the way we can reconstruct this is through Afrocentrism. Okay. For instance, I just want to, for instance, now IEC is forced by the Constitution to allow independent candidates to stand. And we all know that that is a concept of modernity. It speaks about individualism, it speaks about all those type of things. And then we get trapped. And that is why we cannot reconstruct. And now as we say we are reconstructing, we're even making it worse.
Okay, because of my time, sir, can you please go to the question?
Then my question is, how do we dismantle, because that's where it starts, how do we dismantle modernity to arrive at the point where we accept Afrocentrism to speak to all the challenges that we have? Because even the challenge of youth apathy, it's on the basis of modernity. It's not on the basis of Afrocentrism. So that will be my question, but I think we'll need a lecture for this topic.
Thank you so much, sir. Can we take those two hands and go to our panelists so that they wrap? I saw two hands there. Very briefly, sir. 30 seconds, 30 seconds.
Sanbona. Indaba enye khona lana usesukhulume ngayo indaba ye capacity building is very much key. Ngoba if we leader as such we are elected go office ye leadership. Leadership sometimes we confuse leadership ne political ne politiki ne management. Akufani lokho koyi-3. If we leader, kunama qualities athize, there are traits la khona lawa la qualifier wena ukuthi you can be a leader. But if we are not capacitated as bafundisi, seamakhosi sama public figures, kuba ne problem. Ngoba manje kutholakala ba easily captured. Ngisho nabafundisi majority they are easily captured by politicians. Namakhosi they are captured also. Lack of knowledge. Ngoba you can be an academic, but ungasi knowledgeable. Akufani nako lokho. We need a capacity building that will give us a direction.
Capacity building. Thank you, sir. Can we pass it to the
Thank you.
gentleman next to you?
Thank you very much, my sister. I think we need a courageous leadership to attain to these things. But Bonoro mentioned that if we want to do this, we need to go back, reimagining, change the way we're doing things. Thank you.
I know everyone wants to say something, but because of time, I will ask our panelists to respond and wrap it up. Mr. Vilagazi, you can start and respond to what they said and wrap it up.
I think when it comes to capacity building, I think that's what's needed. But above that, I think we need to be realistic in our thinking. We shouldn't think that now, because we're at this point and juncture, we need to then pedal back to a time where things were different and try and articulate things in that manner. Unfortunately, this is where we're at. And being the realist that I don't envision seeing traditional leaders actually getting any better in terms of government looking out for them. I think it's within themselves as traditional leaders that need to say, how can my people hide me from the shame that government leads us into? If it means that akumo 5 rand as a manner of helping abantu basendaweni thizeni to further izinto zenkosi, then that ought to happen. But to sit and say, let us think back so that we can come up with better solutions will not aid or help us moving forward. Thanks.
Doctor?
Thank you very much. I want to talk to the question of modernity versus Afrocentricism. I think in very short terms, what needs to happen is that traditional leaders should develop a voice outside of the political system. That's the response because we have a framework of how traditional leadership used to be before. So they must just develop a voice outside of the political system, and that's the solution. Thank you.
Ms. Bonolo?
I'm going to respond to the question about transformation and the role of traditional leaders. I think we need to get over this idea of this binary approach to development and transformation, and to completely think that one entity is responsible for development, right? The World Bank has this obsession that governments should leave out development. It's something that business can do. It's a long, complex conversation. One of the things that I mentioned in my remarks earlier was that we must think about creative ways. We must think about multidisciplinary ways. We must get over this unilateral approach of how we do development. And it is a bit unfair to completely put the agenda of transformation and development to traditional leaders, because they don't have the resources, they don't have the government mandate. You know, it's a quote-unquote God-given mandate to them. But does it mean they don't have a place to play in transformation and development? No, they do. They can work with the state, they can work with private sector, they can work with civil society organization. There's a tribe in a province where I come from, the Bafokeng tribe. One of the most progressive tribe. I mean, it's a mining community. They give bursaries to students. They've got a big stadium, they've got hotels, and it's because they didn't fold. Of course, there was a privilege of the resources that they already had, but they did that with government. So we must get over this unilateral approach that only one societal entity can fix our problem. As a collective, we need to take it upon ourselves to ensure that there's transformation and development in Africa.
Lamlangeni, thank you very much. I wonder whether it was deliberate that the three of them are there alone and I'm here alone. Now, my loyal citizens have spoken. I'm noting all what they said. We'll play our parts. I submit.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Ms. Mpumalanga, please come forth. Let's give her the hands of applause, ladies and gentlemen, as she's coming forward. Please, asimshayele ntandla.
Can I observe all the protocol? I know I'm standing before you and lunch, so I hope I won't be long. Hosh, I heard you. And thank you very much, Commissioner, for being here. Angat bengiyoba yini. But ngiyabonga ukuthi usukumile, then you clarified the issue. As indicated, we're having another meeting with the House where we will be trying to see how best can we work on all the issues and strengthen our relationships. Angithathe leli thuba ngibonge kubondaba ezitha led by Hoshi Mkwena. Thank you very much for availing yourself. Hoshi, I heard you complaining that if you knew we were going to bring bonke ondabezitha, if not mistaken, 60 of them to this house. I tried to make sure that all of them are here. But unfortunately, the issue of the budget came in. So that's why they are all not here. But thank you very much for gracing this occasion. Bondabezitha ukuthi nibe nathi siyabonga kakhulu asikuthatheli phansi lokho. Angibonge futhi ngibonge ku Dr. Nechiyombo, the rector of TUT in Mbombela. Thank you very much. Uma ngabe bowungakasivumeli ukusebenzisa i-venue yakho, we're not going to be here. But thank you very much for allowing the commission to use your venue. And thank you very much to the whole team of TUT for allowing us to use your venue. I'm surprised why my commissioner didn't say, "Ukuthi walaikhaya umfana waseKhumbula," because he always reminds us. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I know you like the province, you are always supportive. Each time we have an event, you make sure that you are here, because uthi wafunza eKhumbula ndabezitha. That's why he knows this province in and out. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Can I also thank all the other commissioners that might be online? I'm not sure who joined online, but thank you very much to all the commissioners who have joined online. Dr. Yanga, thank you for being our thought leader and elaborating on the topic very clearly. We really do appreciate that. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the panel members for sharing your thoughts with the commission and the audience. First, thanking Mr. Kaya Vilagazi, then Ms. Bonolo, and also Hoshi, as much as Ngimbongile, but on the side as being part of the panelists. He made sure that he become exact on all the challenges that they are experiencing as Amakosi. We know in some instances we're laughing, but that is reality that he was trying to indicate to us. Dr. Rapo, all the way from our national office, you always support us when we have these thought leadership programs. Thank you very much for being here. Let me also thank the chairperson and the secretary of the South African Council of Churches, Obabu Tawa, no Bishop Twala, and any other clergy that is here amongst us. Thank you for gracing this event. PEO Mateta, you are always with me. And I know there are other PEOs that are online. Thank you, PEOs, for supporting me in this event. And also thank you to all the members of management that are online. I know there are also PLC members both at provincial level and municipal level. Thank you for joining and understanding the challenges that are faced by Amakosi and all members of political parties that have joined online. Speakers, mayors online and who are here in attendance, representatives from the provincial legislature, we really do appreciate. I've seen the MEO for City of Mbombela TV, and we also do have other MEOs that have joined online. We really do appreciate. Senior government officials, accounting officers, thank you very much. To the IEC staff, both provincial and at the regional level, thank you for all the hard work that we have done, including the task team from the commission as well as the task team from TUT. Without you, this event was not going to be a success. Sis Sindisu, thank you for the work the job well done. Thank you very much. We do appreciate. To all our guest delegates, Mangushile, nawe ngiyakubonga. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. I had a wonderful time, I must say. You've been a good audience. Thank you so much to our panelists, government officials, political parties, academics. We have arrived to the end of our program. I was told that in my closing, I must say that lunch is served at the back. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you have benefited a lot as much as I have benefited. It's like someone is saying, oh yes, they are reminding me something. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please all sit down and allow everyone who is seated in this table to go forth and get their food so that when they're finished, then we can go. We have come to the end of our program. Thank you so much. Hopefully we've had a wonderful time as much as I've had a wonderful time. Just meet and greet, talk to somebody, ask him or her number, you know, you lend yourself a business deal today.